I want to talk about reviving your MG. This is the Marty put this up on the website. I printed this out on a page of paper for the people in Katy, Texas, at the event there, and it's follows my mantra of of um, of doing things the easiest way, the simplest way, the least expensive way, and the whole goal here is getting your car out of storage. So if you put it back in, if you put it in storage in November, well, you're going to get it out. There isn't a whole lot to talk about really. But if you put it away 17 years ago, then there's a lot to talk about. So that's what we're gonna shoot for, the ones that have been in storage longer. But all these all these um, all these tips and so forth are valid for no matter how long the car's been stored. First one is mice, rodents. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It's so awful. You store your car and you don't store it with the top off because you're going to do that tomorrow, and now it's next spring, or now it's 17 years later and the top is still all folded down and the mice have made a nest inside it and chewed through the fabric. Oh my gosh, it's so frustrating. They love to take up residence under the spare tire. That's a real nice place. They love to take up residence next to the master cylinders in the this American drive, left-hand drive car, but next to the master cylinders in the left inner fender, there's always a tuft of something in there, or some seeds or something. Other places that they find are where the hinges go into the body, again, underneath the bonnet. Sometimes inside the air cleaners. That's my favorite picture there. Hope that they have not taken up residence in the heater box. Oh my gosh, the heater box is the most horrible thing to have to clean. And I mean, it's easier to take the engine and gearbox out than to take the heater box out of the car, which sometimes you have to do if they've taken up residence in there and have been in there for a while, because the smell you just can't get rid of. Try it. I mean, try every compressed air. Try everything you can. We used to have some stuff called enzyme eater, odor eater, enzyme odor eater, something or other. And I don't know if it was snake oil or what, but you squirted it in where the mice had been, and after a while, you couldn't smell that they had been there. I had a guy with a TR6, bought a TR6, came around, big guy, tall, heavy, and wanted a TR6 his whole life. I know this is an MG forum, but this is about mice. And anyway, he says, "Come on, drive around the block and tell me what I bought." And I had to have my head outside the window. The smell from the heater box was so horrid. Oh my gosh, so horrid. And then he talked about bringing it in and started to do some work on it. But then I think he'd had it about 2 weeks, and he came and he says, "Well, I got to sell the car." And I said, "Oh, a domestic issue?" My euphemism for the other person in charge of your life, and your checkbook didn't agree with the purchase. He said, No. He says, "I've had knee replacements." And he said, "I can get into the car, but I can't get out." But anyway, we did have one time that we had to clean the heater box out of. And we used one of those the push button finger things that's got the grippers on the end, and you get little tiny tufts of mouse house out of a TR6 heater located up underneath the dash. Nothing's more difficult to remove on a TR6 than the heater box. MGB is almost as bad. Again, I'd rather take the engine and gearbox out than the heater box. So those are the places that inside the trunk, rarely inside the car, rarely do you find it inside there, but underneath the bonnet and in the boot. So first thing to do is get the car clean, right? Wash it. Blow it off with compressed air. Use a vacuum cleaner. We had a MGB, a Pageant Blue 76. I remember it came in from Las Vegas, got sitting beside the guy's house for a dozen years. And it had all kinds of rodents which had taken up residence underneath the bonnet. And I was vacuuming it out and using the air blaster on it. And Lisa, who ran our front desk, I don't know if she knew she was allergic to the dust that you get from rodents or not. But oh my gosh, she ran out, jumped in her car, and drove down to the pharmacy and bought something that relieved her anaphylactic shock. She's starting to get where she couldn't breathe. And so I was reminded in Texas when I presented this last week that you should always wear a mask because there's rotavirus and all kinds of other stuff that come with mice. And if you're blowing that stuff up into the air and inhaling it, it may not be healthy for you. So rodents, there's no substitute for the jungle cure. Our parks man, Marvin Van Houten, referred to fresh air, sunlight, maybe a little tiny bit of rain as the jungle cure. Anything that goes outside and is baked in the sun and has fresh air going across it always gets cleaner and sounds better. If you haven't changed the engine oil, if you didn't change that before you stored the car, then change it now before you start it up. Just get that old oil out of there. Obviously, the same thing goes for an engine that's been sitting for 17 years. If it has been sitting for a long time, then change it, and then right after you get going, you get a couple of 100 miles on it, change it again because there's a lot of goopy stuff down in the sump that'll get washed around and freed up and can come out with a second oil change. You may want to tune your car. Don't be dismayed by low compression. Whenever the car shuts off, two valves are open: 1 and 3, 2 and 5, 6 and 8, 7 and 4, in that order. So two valves are always open when the engine's sitting still. And those valves can and do rust. They get a lot of rust on their face. So you think, well, before I want to start it up, I better check the compression just to see. So you check the compression, as you got 0 on 2 cylinders, and you go, oh my God, I got to take the cylinder head off. No, stop. Don't take the cylinder head off. Not yet. Make it run first. Make it run. Let those valves bang together into their seats for half an hour before you make such a dramatic step as removing the cylinder head. So just keep that in mind. The fuel, if you parked it last November, it probably starts up with the same fuel. If you parked it 17 years ago, oh my gosh, the fuel is nasty, 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 nasty. And you may have to change the tank, the pump, you may have to blow out the lines, certainly take the float bowl lids off the carburetor and use carburetor cleaner and get the goop out of the bottom of the float bowls. So that can be an issue, and you want to run. If you do replace the tank, if you do, if draining the tank doesn't get out all the old stuff. I had guy called me with a TD, and they could take the tank. They took the tank off the car. They shook it. You could hear it bang, bang, bang inside because there's chunks of dried gasoline on the inside, chunks of varnish, and they could not reduce it. They tried mineral spirits. They tried lacquer thinner. Lacquer thinner dissolves everything. Gasoline dissolves almost everything except old gasoline. And they just couldn't get it clear. They ended up having to buy a brand new gas tank out of NTG in England for a stainless tank for I think $1,400. Anyway, you want to get the lines clear and pump some fresh gas out before you let any fuel into your cleaned up carburetors. If you do have to change fuel hoses, use Gates green hose. I suppose there are other hoses, but if you take a piece of hose a foot long and put gasoline in it, put a bolt and a clamp on each end, come back in a year, not all that gasoline is there. It's evaporated. It's gone through the hose somehow. And the Gates green hose their loss from evaporation is like 5% of what normal hose is. So it's a little more expensive, but that's the hot setup. Now we got the clutch. What about the clutch? So we got the car started, it's running, you know, we changed the fuel, whatever we had to do with the fuel, it's running. You depress the pedal, feels good. You know, you look underneath, arms moving the right amount of distance. If for an MGB, that's only 3/8 to 7/16 of an inch. I know when you look underneath there, when your buddy's pressing down on the clutch pedal, it looks like that clutch fork is moving an inch. It's not. It's not. It's 3/8 to 7/16 of an inch. If it's moving well, it feels good, but you cannot get it into gear. So then you, of course, depress the clutch and you put it in gear and depress the clutch and try to start it. And the whole car lurches because the clutch disc has found itself frozen to the pressure plate and or the flywheel. This is especially true if you've just had a new clutch and then parked the car, so there's no chance for any kind of oil or contaminants to get on the clutch disc. It'll rust. It'll rust to the flywheel. It'll rust to the pressure plate, and you can pump it 100 times and you cannot get it separated. But you can always get it separated by torque. So that means that you get the car pointed down the driveway, you get it warm, and you put it in gear and you start it in gear. The car starts up, starts moving down the road. So then this is in your neighborhood, someplace where it's safe to drive at a relatively slow speed, 10 miles an hour. And you hit the throttle and you hit the clutch at the same time and make the car jerk, make it really violent. Maybe you're doing 20 miles an hour. Make it really, really violent. Hitting the clutch at the same time, and it will break free. It will always break free. I have never failed to thaw a frozen clutch. As close as I got to failure was at Brit Bits. Norman was there. He had a magnet, and I said, what's the matter with that? And he goes, oh, the clutch is frozen. I said, well, just get it loose by driving it. He says, we've tried that. It doesn't work. So Mr. Big here, this is in the summer of 2010, I was out there for a seminar. I said, well, I can do it. Well, man, I must have driven a mile before I got that thing to break loose. Oh my gosh, but I did get it to break loose. Now there's some springs. We talked about clutches before. There's springs around that cushion the movement of the two pieces of the clutch, and I probably wrecked those springs, but still it worked. I mean, it worked. And what else were you going to do? Take it apart? You know, that's a huge project. So anyway, the clutch, it will break free. Cooling system. I guess these aren't coming in order because you'd want to attend to the cooling system before you got it out on the road and before you started it up. But just make sure there's enough coolant in there. If you're using ethylene glycol, that's fine. Change the hoses if the car is old to hoses and belts. Just do it. Just do it. Don't wait for one to spring a leak. And there's a couple of hoses that travel between the heater control valve and the heater matrix in the return line. And so you got an inlet or an outlet from the heater matrix. You got a hose that goes around it, and there's a clamp around that hose. During our complete lubrication, we slacken the clamp and retighten the clamp, tighten it down all the way, make sure it's the band clamps that you buy, the modern band clamps are always so nice. They're not original, but they're so much better than the original clamps. Anyway, what can happen is the hose can be sitting around the inlet or the outlet, and if it starts to leak, coolant will squirt from between the hose and the fitting and squirt into the heater box. So all of a sudden you're getting some greasy film on your windshield. You go, oh my gosh, the heater core's got a hole in it. I got to change the heater core. Stop. Don't change the heater core. Change the hoses. Change the hoses first. Maybe you do have a hole in the heater core, but oh my gosh, what if you've misdiagnosed it, as most people have, and go through all that trouble, and all the problem originally was a loose hose. Brakes are the most important part of the car, right? Brakes, steering, brake lights. So half of the MGBs out there don't have, well, this is probably an exaggeration, but not by much. Half of the MGBs have got non-working frozen rear brakes. How would you even know they were bad? 2/3 of the braking is done in the front of the car anyway, and only 1/3 at the back. So if you're not driving it aggressively, then 2/3 of that braking, the front end of the car dives a little more than it should, but you don't notice. Anyway, the rear brakes are frozen a lot. The front brake calipers, my experience is that you always exercise them first. Don't take them off and rebuild them. Don't buy new ones. Rebuild yours if you absolutely have to. But just exercise the front brake calipers. Take one pad out to put two big thick screwdrivers between the rotor and the puck. Have your associate pump the brakes, and the puck comes out and then jams against those screwdrivers. Squirt the outside of that piston with some brake fluid and lever it back into its housing. Pump it out again. Put more brake fluid on it, push it back in, do that 3 times to each one. After that, you can then bleed the front brakes, and you'll get all this black chunk that's separated from the inside of the hose, separated from the inside of the calipers, and you can expel all that and get fresh brake fluid in there. Remember that the brake hose people now are suggesting that it's 10 years on a brake hose. So if you haven't changed your brake hoses in 10 years, change them. It's like the tire people. The tire people started off at 10 years. Now they're down to 8. I'm not sure modern tires won't last 10 years. It sure seems like they should. But the brake hoses don't cheat there. On the electricals, if your original battery's still in the car, then it's dead. The most oversold part of the MG is the battery, I swear. Most people don't need a battery when they buy a new one. If you take your battery and it's flat dead in to be checked, the meter's going to say bad. Well, the meter always says bad, but it's going to say bad. You're going to buy a battery. So you can always take your existing battery and put a charger on it and charge it for days if you have to get the thing on a full charge. Sometimes a flat battery doesn't like to take a charge, but if you leave enough of a charge on that battery, it'll eventually start to take a charge and absorb the 80 amp hours or so of electricity that should be stored in there. Now, it may be that the battery is old and is bad and only will store 40 amp hours, which means that in dicey conditions or when it gets cold, it isn't going to put out the cold cranking amps. And a new battery is only about $150. They used to say they were 100. They used to say they were 75. And there are 3 different batteries that you need. The T-types can use the one for the later MGB, the Group 24, or the one for the midget, a Group 45. Either battery works. The Group 24 is about twice the size, looks like twice the size of a Group 45. And then if you're going to switch out from twin 6s, you use a Group 26. So MGAs, MGBs use a Group 26 in the passenger compartment, unless you're damned and determined you're going to keep your car original. I appreciate that. People who do that, but it's getting really hard to get good 6-volt batteries. You have to buy them frequently, and they're just as expensive as 12-volt. So why not just buy a good 12-volt? Nobody's going to see it anyway. Put it in the battery compartment. And then if you got an earlier car, 67 or before, you got to get out the single-edged razor blade and scrape off the positive earth club off your windscreen and wire your car negative earth so it conforms with everything else in the world. It's a real nice thing to do. Clean the fuse box. Take the fuse box off the car and clean the fuse box. Now, there's some cars that's real hard. A T-type, the fuse box, oh my gosh, you'd have to have arms that are 2 or 3 feet longer to reach the screw on the top and reach into the inside to get the nut on the back side to get it off and so forth. But the more modern cars, 70 through 80, 68 through 80, you can take those fuse boxes off really easily, pay attention to where the wires go. And on the 4 fuse box, keep in mind, you can put it on upside down. If you put the fuse box on upside down, then when you start the car up and turn the key off, it won't turn off. Okay, that's a pretty good indicator that you have a problem. As far as the body goes, you know, you can find a cleanup shop. You can find a cleanup shop around town, somebody that does prep, used car prep, somebody that does auto detailing. They've got 1,000 colors of paint, and they'll take the little nicks and scratches on your car and get something really close to it, and you know, put it in those little areas, sand it, buff it all out, make it look just spectacular. It's worth the $300 or whatever it costs to have it done. And if your tonneau or top has shrunk, as they do when they're not in use, the plastic, I don't know why they shrink, but they do, you can expand them by putting them out in the hot sun. I had that cool picture of our stretcher. Years ago, we had that stretcher. We had clamps all along the outside, and we turn that thing a couple of turns each day, and it'd sit outside for 4 days. And when it was all done, it would just floppy fit onto the cockpit. It was really nice. That's why you always store your car with the soft top up. So that's it. Just reviving the MG. I'll take questions that you've got, or particular things you've run into or something I forgot. But you know, drive your car. That's the secret. You know, don't park it for too long. Sometimes things happen. I appreciate it. That gets put away wet, you know. And we always suggest a complete lubrication. That's on the website. The complete lube whenever you're getting your car back out again. Or if you're following a schedule, every 5 years, every 12,000 miles, and that's oil in the gearbox, oil in the differential, oil in the shocks, and tightening the front shocks, and greasing the front wheel bearings, and adjusting the rear brakes, and bleeding the brakes, and servicing the battery, and greasing up the seat slides, and putting WD-40 on the bonnet pull so it doesn't freeze up, et cetera, et cetera. That complete lube is a long list. So anyway, I'm gonna before I go over to the chat section, I want to ask if anyone's got any comments about storage or problems or things that they've run into.
You spoke about reviving a battery.
Yeah.
And that's the old-fashioned routine, but unfortunately I've got one of the newer Harbor Freight electronic chargers.
Yes. Yeah.
And it will absolutely not respond to a dead battery. You have to fool it by putting a good battery in parallel with your dead battery and then have it charge them both. But if you don't do that, I don't care how long you leave it on there, it's not going to play.
Thank you. Thank you. The way that the battery charger puts electricity into the battery is by exceeding the 13.2 volts that the battery is. Each of those cells is 2.2 volts. Therefore, we get 12-volt batteries, right? Somehow, I don't know. Anyway, in the running voltage, when your car is running and operational, the alternator is working, it's at 14 volts, and that allows a little bit of electricity to move into the battery. And the difference in a battery charger, when it says 2 amp or 10 amp or 50 amp, it's just the voltage. So Bob's got a good idea here of just taking jumper cables and hooking it up to your existing car. It won't run it flat. On the other hand, you can hook up your Harbor Freight battery tender to your car and then run cables from your car down to your battery. But if you got an old-fashioned charger, yeah, and sometimes you wait and you wait and you wait, and all of a sudden, it gets to the right specific gravity, so that electricity starts to flow through it, and it'll charge it back up again. Anyway, thanks for that comment, Bob.
Yeah, the idea is that a float charger will never charge a battery. It just maintains a charge.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how those work. I don't know how often they check the voltage, but I know they check the voltage. And the question is 13.2, and if it's not, it'll shoot just something into the battery, not much. But it's yeah, when they're dead, they don't work at all. Any other comments about getting cars out?
Yeah, John, you mentioned about reviving a shock. How do you do that?
Well, you need shock oil. You can buy that. I know Moss has got it for sale, and I know motorcycle shops have it for sale because they sell it as fork oil. The original oil is 20 weight. Get the thickest stuff you can. It helps revive a shock. And you need a dedicated oil can. On the end of my oil can, I've got a tube, just a piece of flexible rubber hose. And on the end of that, I've got a piece of 3/16 copper tubing that I've bent into sort of a U shape. And so you take the filler out of the shock, put that copper down inside the shock, and pull the trigger on your dedicated oil can that's got shock oil in it until your finger either falls off or you get it filled up, whichever comes first. If you don't get it all the way filled up, you got to come at it then the next day. And then you just hope and pray that it'll come back. They usually don't. The rear shocks, the axle in the shock is above the pistons. So it can leak down to the axle that's turning. It can leak down to there, and there's still plenty of oil in the two piston, in front of the two pistons that goes through the valve. But the front shock, the axle is halfway between the top and bottom piston. And if it leaks out, you just get air in there, and it won't revive. But sometimes it can, sometimes you can. It just depends. If you do have to change the shock, there are a couple of different places in the United States to get the shock rebuilt. I always prefer Worldwide Imports in Madison, Wisconsin. I think they do a really nice job. They've always done the job for me, and I think they may provide. I think they may do it wholesale for some of the other suppliers. So.
Okay, you mentioned about filling the shock. Mine are not wet or anything, which means either all the oil ran out already or they're not leaking. But how do you fill it? I mean, where is there?
So there's on the front shock on an MGB. We're dealing with the B.
Yeah, I have an MGB. Yeah.
Yeah.
80.
Well, when you look right behind the tire and you see the shock right at the top of the shock, looking right back at you, when you're looking at it, is a 5/16 British bolt. Your 13 millimeter wrench will fit it. You unscrew it, and that's the access to the reservoir on the shock. So you just go ahead and fill it up. If it's already shock and it's bouncy, it's toast. Time to get another one.
No, it seems to work okay, but I never really knew how those shocks worked or how to make sure they had oil in them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So that's on the complete lube list, and every now and then, you just want to put oil in there. They've got an area at the very top, which is an air trap. So you don't want to fill up the air trap too, but if you got a hook going into it, that won't happen. The problem is if you take a normal oil can and you've got an end to it and you got a hole, on the shock, and you try to squirt into it, it blows back at you. So that's why we use that little 3/16 piece of tubing, and it's a 5/6. I think it's a 5/16 filler hole, or maybe it's a 1/4 inch filler hole, but it's with a British standard brass thread. It's a bizarre thread on the car. But anyway, a 13 millimeter wrench will undo it, and then put your dedicated end of your oil can in there with fork oil or shock oil, and just fill it up until it squirts out.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hey, John,
Yeah, Fred.
I'm not sure you mentioned it, but did you mention, going through and looking at all of your rubber bits underneath, just make sure your rubber boots on your trunnions are good, make sure it's greased. I mean, obviously, I think you mentioned grease and everything, but examining all the rubbers to make sure they haven't deteriorated. Steering rack boots, making sure that's good.
What I did is said, I have this list, and this is sort of the short list, right? But accompanying this is the complete lubrication, which is greasing the front wheel bearings and taking apart the rear brakes and exercising the front calipers and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that absolutely. If it's been 17 years since you've driven the car, it's got to go up. You've got to drain out all the oils. You've got to do a whole lot of work to it. Thanks for reminding me.
Posted in the chat.
Okay. Oh, thanks. The link to the complete lube. Thanks, Marty.
I like after the car has been down that long as well to deal with the brake fluid.
Yes.
Any modern car now has got you changing your brake fluid out at 60,000 miles or something like that. And
the University Motors Complete Lube has you changing it out every 12,000. So
yeah,
or every 5 years, which is
most of our cars don't run that kind of mileage, so you better do it on a lot less.
Yeah.
But you can do yourself a favor in that process as well by sucking the master cylinders dry if there's anything still left in there, and then opening the bleeders at the calipers or the wheel cylinders and squeezing them back to the least volume they can contain. Wheel cylinders are typically backed out to zero anyway, before you try and introduce fresh fluid. So you get any of the real gook that has been there from the deteriorating hoses and cylinders, not forced to go back through your master cylinder, which may be okay unless you gook it up with that stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's good. You just have to be cautious with drawing the fluid because you're going to cross the fender with whatever if you've stolen the what's that device in the kitchen?
My mother's baster, but I don't use that anymore.
Yeah, it's like,
Actually, I use like a soda bottle with 2 1/4-inch holes in the cap, the screw-on cap, and 2 pieces of the Tygon hose or whatever, which fits in those. One of them I push in a little bit and I can suck on it, and the other one I push in pretty well deeply and put it in the reservoir. And I like using the Mighty Vac or whatever, but I don't have one of those, so I'm the Mighty Suck. And you can empty them pretty quickly that way.
That's a good idea. And then it's just there's less fluid to move through there. I'm always concerned about the water. There's always water that gets into there. Who knows how water gets in there, but it does. And it separates, it doesn't mix with the fluid, it sits at the bottom, rusts the bottom of the boards. So yeah.
You want to pull that all out before you force it back through any of the hydraulic system. Don't even step on that pedal if you think if you're going to do the brake fluid, give yourself the best chance and don't even try and exercise it first.
Good idea. Thank you.
John?
Yes.
Typically regarding the clutch slave cylinder, one of the things I almost always do is pull back the rubber boot near the piston of the push rod and just see what condition that is behind that rubber dust boot, because almost 99% of the time, if the car is sat for any length of time at all, it's just all cluttered up with a bunch of goo, and even though it hasn't really been leaking or whatever, it's just this white powdery crap, that's in there. So
this dry
out the whole
dry aluminum. I don't know what it all is. So we stopped bleeding the clutch on a complete lube because we found that 2 weeks after we'd bled the clutch, it failed. And so it just leave well enough alone. But after 17 years, that's a different ballgame. But my rule on slave cylinders is if the slave is bad, it leaks, and if it leaks, it's bad. So if it's not leaking, it's still serviceable. The master cylinder, if it leaks, it's bad, but it can leak internally. You wouldn't know it. The fluid going past the primary piston, primary cup, and you can't get enough pressure in there.
I recently revived a MGA that had sat for 32 years, and it had silicone brake fluid in it, and all of the brake parts, the master cylinder, the slave cylinder, were still functional and perfect.
Very nice.
That's why the military invented the stuff, so they could store their motor pool in weird places should they be needed indefinitely.
So the only prohibitions to using silicone brake fluid are that when you're bleeding silicone brake fluid. We talked about this last time. You got to do it so slowly, because if your buddy is on the pedal going pump 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 pump, it's aerated. So you got to come back tomorrow. Just let all the bubbles rise back up and escape. You do it very deliberately. The other thing is that on some of the cars, MGAs with that dual master cylinder design and the earlier Sprites, midgets, silicone does cause the rubber components to swell a tiny, tiny little bit. And you have to account for that in those MGA cylinders by allowing the pistons to come a little farther forward, a 32nd of an inch, just not much. It's the easiest thing is just put a different spacer gasket on the front of the cylinder so the pistons can go through it and bottom out on the front cover. You can do it in place. You don't even have to take the cylinder apart. But you got to account for that, or the brakes will come on by themselves, or worse, the clutch comes on by itself. You wouldn't even know, and then the throwout bearing is riding against the pressure plate and against the thrust plate on the pressure plate and burning up. So.
That's a viscosity consequence for the silicone because it is slow. It's slow fluid, as you say. You got to even wait for the bubbles to fly out of it. Yeah, and if the piston doesn't get back to the vent hole, back into the reservoir, it's held on.
Yeah. I've been stopped on the street, like in the car, feels like the Rock of Gibraltar. You have to do is crack any line. The earlier cars, single circuit brake, crack any line, you get about enough fluid to get on the back of your fingernail. It's unbelievable. It's just tiny little bit of fluid. Car's absolutely free, works great until it jams up again. So, anyway. Okay, do we have some more comments about long-term storage?
Yeah, we haven't had a mouse problem because we use dryer sheets and
Okay.
bowls of
Peppermint.
peppermint, cotton balls soaked in peppermint, various places around the car, and they don't like that, either one of those, and it seems to work. We haven't no mouse has eaten our wires.
Very nice. Somebody on sometime in the last 80 sessions when we talked about winter storage they knew more about rodents than I did. And they said that mice live by their noses and they smell their way around. And if they get into an environment where there's such a powerful smell that they can't smell other smells, then they just stay away from it. And I guess dryer sheets, we used to put naphthalene mothballs in nylons when women still wore nylons. You could buy nylons, and you could put like 20 of them in there, and so they weren't rolling around loose. And I always caution people about mothballs. There's two kinds. One's naphthalene, smells like your grandma's cedar chest. The other one is paradichlorobenzene, and you smell that and you go, where is that? I know that smell. I know that. Where is that smell? It's from urinal cakes. Those urinal cakes, and that's sort of a disgusting. Once you're onto it and remember where the smell came from, it's kind of a yucky smell to have wafting around in your car for a week after you get it out of storage. More comments? Anybody else about anything they've seen or?
John,
Yes.
when I got my 1969 MGC, it had been stored for 5 years. And I spent the time to get the engine ready and change the fluids and everything. I had changed the gas in the gas tank. But one day I got the engine, everything was ready to go. And I thought, well, I wonder if it'll start. And so it did start, and it ran okay, but the exhaust smelled terrible because of that old gas.
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. Yeah, yep. Yeah,
It smells terrible when you get it on the rag or on your hands. It still smells terrible, even if you could get it to combust, and sometimes it just won't light.
we had an Austin America that we hadn't driven for, I don't know, my late wife and I. We hadn't driven for a season, pushing that. And I go to start it up, spin over briskly, choke comes out, jets drop, HS carburetors, jets drop, would not start. Give it the tiniest burst of carb cleaner or ether, start right up, and it would continue to run. And once it was warm, it would restart throughout the day, but it wouldn't then restart the next morning when it was cold, because all those volatile lightweight components had already evaporated out of the gasoline, and it wouldn't vaporize. It just wouldn't vaporize. But it was so weird. That was a long time ago, and they're always fiddling with that was before MTBE. They're always fiddling with the oxygenation of the gasoline. More recently, of course, with the alcohol.
John?
Yes, Crystal, who got first places down in Texas for her car.
Yeah, I was very honored on that one. Thank you. Hey, when I went to pick up my 70 MG, right, that I bought up in Oklahoma, it had been sitting for quite a few years, and they had left the handbrake on, okay,
Oh,
which made the brake shoes in the rear, lock onto the drums. We tried everything under the sun to get them unstuck, and then I read somewheres to take a big sledgehammer, right, 10, 15-pound sledgehammer, and hit it like you really mean it. And that's the way we finally got the brake shoes disengaged. But I found that's one of the things do not do, or at least that's what I learned. Do not put the handbrake on if it's going to be in storage for quite a long time.
quite right. And the big hammer trick, whereas it helps if you've got, sometimes you can get there if you got, the lead hammer isn't so good because it's too soft. It doesn't, the shock isn't quite as bad. But you got a copper faced hammer for spinners. You can beat on those drums, and it's like, well, what if I break the drum? Well, it's still cheaper than pulling the drum off and bending all the shoes, bending the backing plates. And, oh my gosh. So yeah. Thank you.
But hit the drum radially. Don't hit the face of it.
Well, when it doesn't come loose, you're hitting it everywhere. Eventually it'll come out. Yeah, you're smacking it on the side. Of course, you can't turn it, so you can only hit it, from around the top. But yeah, we've done that a lot. And I've never broken a brake drum. T-type brake drums, that's different. They've got a flange on them, and boy, you miss with your hammer and you hit that, and it cracks off, and then it goes out of balance. But MGB and MGA brake drums, midget brake drums, hasn't been a problem.
When we worked on that 52 TD that sat for 33 years, we went to AutoZone and got a puller and very carefully got the drums off. The question I have is, because of the position of the master cylinder, it was nearly impossible to bleed those brakes. Is there a trick to that?
On the TD? bleed it out at the wheels.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to want to bleed for some reason. That master cylinder is lower. We had a hard time. So the guy that owned it worked at a dealership, and I said, you know, put on a lift, have your guys do it. So I don't know how they did it.
Yep, yep, just well, sometimes it helps when you're bleeding. If you bleed right at the master cylinder first, you know, you go, okay, well, it's worked. You know, you crack the line loose back there and you down and it all dribbles out and it gets all over you and the floor and the frame and all that kind of stuff. It's worse on like an MGB where you're up, you know, up underneath the bonnet and you're bleeding with real brake fluid, .3 or .4, and it's like, where's the paint work? You know, it wants to chew that stuff up so badly. You can 68 and newer, you can bleed it at that shuttle valve down on the inner fender, and then put a lot of rags around it, and you just get it out that far. You go, okay, well, it's bled to there, so it should bleed now out at the ends, and you always bleed the cylinders the farthest away from the master cylinder when you're following not as the crow flies, but from the distance of how far the hydraulic fluid has to move. So that means the left rear is the farthest away from the car, even in the left or right-hand drive. Left rear is farthest away. So
I wonder if not bleeding is a result of the flex tubes having collapsed. If it been in storage that long, you may not be able to push the fluid through it like you want to.
quite
We had to replace all the brake lines on that car. It sat for 33 years under a cover outside, but nothing rusted solid. We got every nut and bolt, even a manifold, because we soaked it with deep creep for days before we even touched it, and it never saw salt.
Wait a minute, deep creep. That's I haven't heard of that one before. Where do you buy that?
It's made by
Seafoam.
Seafoam. You can get it at Walmart or
Okay.
Anywhere.
AutoZone or Advance, anywhere. And
Okay.
my brother told me about it. He bought some. He had to get a trailer hitch off a truck that had been on there for years. He saturated with that and then hit it a few times. Went inside, had a cup of coffee, came out, and it came off. I had a hard time believing that, but
Hey,
it's true.
go figure. I mean, there are other things you hear about that's hard to believe, like getting the nut off a oil cooler up front. You know, I mean, you put the 15/16 wrench on the cooler and the inch wrench on the nut, and you're pushing them in opposite directions, and it's like, this ain't gonna work. And then of course you wreck it and you tear the threads off. But if you get that hot, really, really hot with just a propane torch, just get it really, really hot. I mean, like a couple of minutes of that propane torch, round and round and round on that, and then take some rags, a bunch of wet rags. I'll pull them out of a 5-gallon pail, dripping with water. You can undo that by hand. I swear you can. Sometimes it's uncanny how free it gets. So anyway, deep creep. I'll keep that one in mind. Thanks.
It's made by Seafoam, and I'll tell you, it works better than anything I've ever tried.
Okay.
And another question, talking about the brake fluid, I read somewhere, now I can't find it. It might be an old wives' tale or whatever, that above 10,000 feet, the silicone will boil, but it has a higher boiling point than standard brake fluid. So I don't know if that's true or not. I'm over 10,000 feet a lot during the summer, so I'm afraid to use that.
Don't know. I would think that would not be the case because it's all got to go through Department of Transportation, and they'd have warnings out the wazoo on it if it wasn't satisfactory. So the question is, do airplanes use it? You know, and then the question is, if all those French cars use automatic transmission fluid in some of their hydraulic circuits, why can't we use ATF in ours? Why can't we use ATF instead of brake fluid? I've never got a good answer on that. Maybe it's the boiling point. I don't know.
Well, some people don't like Some people don't like anything new. Like I've read some guys tell me,
Well, yeah.
don't use synthetic oil. It's superior to regular oil, but some people just don't like change.
Well, that is a fact. Got any more comments? Anybody got anything going?
Yeah, John, George here in Phoenix.
George.
While we were on that brake situation, we were at a little car show here just this weekend, and one of the guys there's got the most beautiful GT you ever seen, well engineered, gorgeous, just gorgeous. But in his efforts of doing his engineering, he put some torsion bars on in the back and some different things. But he told me and asked me a question. He said, I rotated my backing plates on the rear axle 180 degrees to where the bleeder's now at the bottoms to the top, so he could get to this stuff, okay? Because of everything he had welded on. The question is, will that affect the brakes in any way?
No, the handbrake, because the levers are coming in, but you know, if this guy's a fabricator, I mean, you can do anything.
Yeah.
So,
well, he fabricated his own handbrake arrangement and everything. Just this car is so gorgeous, you can't believe it. But he seems to think that he don't have the braking that he did before. But that's probably because he don't have his brakes adjusted right. So.
Well, it could be that, or it's taken him so long to get the car done that he's gotten used to his 2017 Chevy Equinox and how quickly that stops. Because people, you know, the bottom line is, if you go out on the road surface and you jam on your brakes, can you get all four to lock up? If you can get all four to lock up, you don't need better brakes, you need better tires.
Yeah, and I think he mentioned that he didn't think he could get them to lock up. So I'll look at it later. That was just showed up Sunday, so I haven't had a chance.
Sure.
Thanks, John.
Hey, you're welcome.
That might be related to something my friend Julian McKay ran into. He would take on projects that people had tackled and try and finish them for him. And he had a TD where he just couldn't get the brakes bled. And someone had done a real tear down to the pieces and had put the wrong backing plates and wheel cylinders on the wrong sides. And the bleeding arrangement was the bleeders were low on the cylinders rather than at the top of the cylinders, and you could just never get that air pocket out.
Yeah, there's stuff like that. You can end up on an MGA 1600. You can get the calipers switched side to side. Probably can on a B too. And if the bleeder's at the bottom, you can't get the air out that it's in the top. Not without moving a whole lot of fluid real fast, and you can't move it that fast. The other thing with the T types is that the cylinders, MGAs, the cylinders go on the correct way as long as you don't get the backing plates mixed up. But the T types, you can put the cylinders either way, and whenever you're putting the cylinder on, the front cylinder pushes down. Remember, kneel down and next to your car, pray to your car, kneel down. That's how I've got and then the rear cylinder pushes up, but the front one pushes down. And if you get that backwards, my gosh, you have to have a leg the size of a tree to bring that car to a stop. Oh my gosh.
How many following shoes do you want?
So yeah.
John, I have a question about your on the complete lubrication.
Yeah.
One of the things that you list on there is to retorque the head, and
that's not on the lube. That's on the tune.
right.
Okay.
Oh yeah, on the tune. So I'm assuming the way I've always done that is to crack the nut a bit and then torque it back down.
Yes.
You say to do that with the motor hot.
That's what I do. You're not tuning it unless it is hot. But if it hasn't been running 100 years, then you can't get it hot. You start, you do what you can. So I back that nut off until about half the threads are showing inside the nut, and then flush it with oil. And then the oil gets between the threads and the stud and underneath. Because when you're doing, when you're torquing something, a third of the torque goes between the threads, a third of it goes between the nut and whatever surface it's pushing against, and then only a third of it's left for the clamping force. So that I'm real keen on getting all of those, so the clamping force is the same on each cylinder, which is why you back it off, you oil it, and you pull it down.
And the torque setting that you have, that's for oiled threads. And I'm also wondering, is it the same for T's, B's, A's,
No,
midgets?
not T's. No, not T's. Those things will pull apart. You can only get up to about 45 pounds on a T type. But the A series, the midgets, and the MGBs and the MGCs, those original studs, they do not stretch. They just, I mean, I've rarely seen one stretched. And the factory, I think, only wants you to torque it down to around 50. I just say 55. I've just rarely snapped a stud. So,
John, our friend up in Maine,
Tom,
Tom sells ARP studs for the T series,
yes.
and he says torque it to 80.
Well, okay, all right. But
That's not stock, of course.
No, those are ARP. Those are ARP studs. So,
I guess my question is, does the head, well, you can't do anything to that big thick piece of cast iron. So why would you need to torque it that much? I mean, I did because that's what Tom said, but I hadn't thought about it. If you're saying with regular stock head studs, you'd only go to 50?
45 on a T type usually. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's your chance of having a problem between the head and the block is less. That's all.
Okay.
Just
I
tight.
guess.
And would you do that every spring?
No, as often as you tuned it up, that you torque the head and adjust the valves. It's like, remember when everybody says, oh, I'm going to do points and condenser, right? Change points and condenser. It's just that flows out of your lip. So torque the head, adjust the valves, flows out. You don't have to torque the head, but I always do. So in that once every what? 10,000 miles, isn't very often.
And if you're building something, do not lose the head nuts, because the ones you get out of the bin will not hold the torque you even ask of them. And you will just feel like, oh my God, it just never stops turning. I'm destroying something. You're really destroying the nut, but it's a terrible feeling.
Yeah. So those are hardened nuts. And also on T types, we started at some point, we started adding hardened washers. Can't use, you got to use 10 millimeter washer, but there was at the time, that we're doing all this, Napa had blister packs of hardened 10 millimeter, head washers. You buy that for $8 or, I mean, that was them, and you only need 10 of them. So,
But a non-hardened washer is a booby trap. You would do much better just to torque the nut right straight to the head.
I got to use my mute all here because we had some background noise, but now we're back. So, all right. Do we have any more questions about storage? Because it's 8:12, and I want to get into the chat section. See what fun stuff there is this week. So Marty's got some. Yeah.
You mentioned the backing plates on the TD and it could be put on wrong. And that may be why we couldn't bleed it. This car that we worked on sat for 33 years because whoever put the ground strap on, put it from the body to the frame, it didn't have a ground. So I'm thinking, I wonder what else they did. but when I asked you if I should take the job, you said if the engine turns over, it'll start. And it did. So
If the engine turns over, it will start. Yep,
Yeah, it's the DPO that gets you every time.
yep. Let's see, we got a question here from Picton, Picton. Any update on Clark Spare's new ownership? That is Tom at British Miles. What he's doing with that stuff, I don't know. But Cecilia told me that from Scarborough. She was kind of keen on buying some of that stuff. I'm not sure whether she's going to make all the nice little brackets that Todd Clark used to make, but she did want to get that ability to stamp out plates. That was one thing that Todd did for everybody's engine plates, and you can have your plates, you can take them to a jeweler and have them engraved, but then of course they don't look like a real one. And if you're trying to do it yourself, oh boy, it looks like you did it yourself. And if you're trying to do one from the engine, it's a reverse stamp. So those are even weirder. So anyway, that's Tom at British Miles. That's all I know on that. Mr. Hurston, a few sessions ago, when discussing the Zenith Stromberg carburetor, you mentioned a situation when the carb starts leaking. When I recently started my 78 Roadster, it started leaking like a sieve for the first time. Please remind us of what can resolve this. Well, the first thing that happens that might be, are you on, Hurston?
I am, thank you. Yes, I am, thank you.
What's your name?
Ed Hurston.
Yeah, all right. So the first thing is that the needle and seat is stuck. And so the float doesn't come up and stop the flow of gasoline. And that gasoline will flow out the tube that's supposed to go over to the charcoal canister. It'll flow out the throat if that tube is plugged up. So that's the most likely thing. So take off the air cleaner and take a hand, sounds crude here, take a hammer and wrap the front of the carburetor right underneath the throat. The needle and seat is offset to whichever side the gasoline's coming in. So you can sort of maybe move your hammer a little fore or aft, but just hit it. I mean, you can hit it pretty hard before you do any damage. And it's so much easier to have it jar loose that way than having to take the whole carburetor off the car. I mean, you take it off the car, take the float bowl, the cover off, but now here's a gasket, and then you get there, and by the time you're done banging around on the carburetor, it'll probably come loose anyway. So just bang it with a hammer. That's almost always the case.
Super, thanks so much.
Sounds crude, but it's a real.
Many years ago, I had a boss that convinced me that just about anything could be fixed with a can of oil and a big enough hammer.
That's why he was your boss. Yep. Yep. Let's see. Here, John Dyke question about banging sound from the rear of my 53 TD when on a rough road or going over bumps. Banging. So, John, you were already on once when we were talking about the storage, but you've got this problem here, so you can come on in.
Yeah. It really sounds like there's somebody who is beating on the back of the car with a hammer or a pipe. And I've gone under there and I've tightened up the U clamps over the axle, which is what that sound typically sounds like. It didn't help. I've had my wife drive the car while I took the little trap door off the back and stuck my head back in there, and I couldn't see anything wrong, but I could hear the banging. And I'm wondering, is that the kind of sound that could come from a broken leaf spring?
No, and you would have seen the broken leaf spring. I mean, you can see a broken leaf spring. Plus, the car starts to sag, so that's probably not it. The shocks can come loose where they're into the frame. The shocks can rotate. The shock link from the shock down to the plate, down to the bottom. 53. So you got a real real connectors between the shock and those plates. But that very often clucks, CLUCK, more like a chicken, cluck, cluck. It isn't and then the question is, what's in the uh, storage compartment for the side curtains, and
Yeah.
is the exhaust hitting that? So it's so difficult. I don't have any other. Something's moving.
Yeah, something's moving,
on,
and
on a
it's
78B, when the sway bar is loose, it clacks. I mean, it's just clack clack. I mean, it's just, and all you do is tighten up the where it goes through some ears on the frame, and bingo, all taken care of. So did you tighten up the shocks against the frame?
No, I have not tried that. It doesn't appear to be the exhaust, and since the side curtain box is wooden, it's not that kind of a sound. It's
Yeah.
a metal to metal sound, and
Okay.
there's nothing in there. You know, I mean, I keep the side curtains in there,
Yeah, okay. All right.
but I'll take a look at the shock mountings. I was hoping that it was, since I've tried looking at everything, that maybe it was one leaf that was broken and somehow it was moving and banging. But if you don't think that's it, then I can go under and still take a look at the shock.
If you
Hey, John?
check, yeah,
I just had an issue, very similar to that, and it turned out the shock bushings or the spring bushings were totally shot on one side.
okay, all right. Okay,
Okay.
so I was gonna suggest that instead of jacking the car up and putting jack stands underneath the frame and letting the frame come down and being under stress and trying to find the problem, that you can still put the jack stands under the frame, but then put your trolley jack underneath the back of the diff and jack it up until it just wants to lift up off the jack stands. So that now you can grab a hold of stuff. And if you get a great big screwdriver, you can put it between the frame and the spring to see if it's probably not that. John Hughes didn't suggest, I don't think that it was at the back on the shackles, but at the front, at the silent block bushing. So that's pretty bizarre.
It was all of those.
Okay.
All of them were shot.
All right. Okay. And that way you can also grab a hold of the shock links and see if those are loose. So.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm going to take a look at that. It's been
not
it's
under
been 40
stress.
years. It's been 40 years since I did those, and it's probably I probably have 75,000 miles on the car.
Okay. All right. Cool. You gonna go take the car down to GF Central? You going to that event?
I was going to, but it seems like I might have a family thing in California that will get in the way of it.
Yeah, family always takes precedence. Yeah.
Well, if I do come down, John, you know I'm going to get in line for the tech session and let you listen to it.
Yeah, I'll drive it. I'll drive
All
it.
right.
So, all right. So next one up here, James to Russia. I've ordered my new clutch, Borg and Beck, and my slave and master rebuild kits for my 77B. First question, any literature or video to help me replace that clutch? Secondly, when I pull the engine, what other maintenance should I do with that access? Not looking to open up a can of worms. Mission creep. There's another word that I heard this weekend. I can't remember what it was. But you know, with the engine out of the engine bay, is there anything else that makes sense? So yes, Mr. DeRusha, are you still on?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So when you sling the engine out, you're going to separate all those nuts and bolts from the gearbox to the engine, so that you get access to the front seal on the gearbox. You know, you can take the front cover off. You got to buy a gasket kit, but the gasket kits are cheap. And then there's also the fork, bolt, and bushing. 11G. Oh, come on, I don't know any of the Moss numbers. 11G 3195 and 96. Anyway, there's a bolt and bushing there that the release bearing fork moves on. You want to change those. You want to change the bushing and the bolt, because those are worn. So while those are off, then you can get the front cover off and change the front seal on the gearbox. So should you take the flywheel off and change the rear seal on the back of the engine? Now's the time. Now's the time, you know. So those flywheel bolts have got a really thin head on them. And if you use a normal 3/4 inch socket, you'll strip the heads of those bolts because of the rounding on the inside of the socket. So I've got a 6-point socket that I put on a belt sander. Actually, I put it on a lathe and trimmed it down, but you can put it on a belt sander and take it down until you've just got 6 flats. There's no rounding on the bottom side. The rounding's for quick fit, so you can put it on, but you don't want that. I'm just cautioning you here. You can use the old lock plate. You don't have to get a new lock plate. You just drive the fingers back. On the other hand, you can get a new lock plate too. There's a new lock plate on the that holds the seal in place. You can get a new lock plate there and get a new seal that comes with this prophylactic device that allows you to grease it all up and slip it into place without having to take the rear engine plate off. You might choose to change the front oil seal on the engine. So the timing cover comes off. Now here's where that can of worms starts, because when you look at the chain, you go, oh my God, the chain is stretched. I better change the chain and the tensioner. So like, okay, but anyway, change the seal up there. One thing you must do is change the gasket under the front tappet inspection cover. Now the rear one doesn't leak. Maybe it comes a little loose, but it's trapped, just won't change. It doesn't leak. But the front tappet inspection cover, oh my gosh, they leak, and the new gaskets are just too small. They don't fit well. So go to Napa someplace and buy some cork, buy a piece of sheet cork, and cut a gasket with a real nice wide outside on it, and use Ultra Black or the Right Stuff or something, Permatex, on that, and put it back in place so it's real tight. The engine brackets, that's the brackets, the 90-degree brackets that go between the motor mount and the front engine bearing plate. They're held on with 2 5/16 bolts up here and a 3/8 bolt down on the engine block. Those tear. So weld a little gusset in the 90-degree section. And I find somebody, maybe you can weld, maybe you find somebody, clean it up and just weld a little tiny gusset in there. If they've been in there for a long time, you can probably see where one of them's already starting to tear. So I think that's probably it, besides the clutch.
Okay. Yeah.
Spigot bush, change the spigot bush in the crank. And you can use, the tedious way to get that spigot bush out is to snap off a piece of hacksaw, put it into a pair of vice grips, get a television out there or something or other, because you're going to be sitting for a long time trying to saw a freaking slot in that thing. The easiest way is to get a tap, but that's a really big tap. That I think the diameter is 0.800. So you get it like a 7/8 tap to go in there, and you screw the tap in. The tap hits the crank. You keep turning it. Something's got to move, and the bushing just slides right out. We used to drive them out with hydraulic force, but you need another first motion shaft for that. You can't hit any kind of piece of wood or anything to drive it out. So those are two ways.
Yeah, the hydraulic way I like, but you may have to go looking for a bolt or a piece of rod material or something that will be about that size, so you can saw off a section to get a solid round fit into the pilot bushing.
Yeah,
smack that and the bushing will come crawling back out.
It will, but it's got to be 800 thousandths, and the only thing that's 800 thousandths is another first motion shaft. We used to, we just had some that were donors. You'd fill up that whole cavity with grease, put that thing in there, and take the big hammer that who was talking about that? Crystal maybe was talking about the big hammer and just bang, 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 and it'll walk it right out. Absolutely.
But a bushing driver might be the right size too.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, and then there are, if you get exotic now, we're going to OTC tools, you can get the little thing that goes on the inside and catches the bushing and draws it out, but those never worked. I gave up on those. Anyway, so James,
How about the opportunity to go after the rear mount, the transmission mount and the reaction mount
oh
back?
yeah, sure,
They
sure.
usually they're so slimy by the time you got to do this. You want to replace them.
Been washed in oil for the last 13 years. Yeah, so that all the gearbox mounts. So there's two saddle mounts, and then there's two other round mounts that go in vertically that you will drive you bonkers because the mount's that big around and the hole you're trying to get it through is the size of a dime. You can do it. It's possible. But oh my gosh, and then there's the fore and aft bushings too. So those, yeah. So all of a sudden we've doubled your parts. We've doubled your parts cost here.
Oh boy, that's the time to do it.
And the front motor mounts too might be sagging.
Motor mounts are already on my list. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So the right one, slam dunk, easy schmeezy. Left one, even with the engine out of there, oh my God, it's going to drive me crazy. And sometimes it's easier to pull the pinion out of the rack and pinion. Okay, it just is. Then you can get so to get the pinion out, the top of the rack and pinion comes off, the front comes out, the bolt comes out from the steering U-joint. Then you put two pairs of vice grips or more on the steering shaft, which is hardened. Crank those things down, get them as tight as you can, and then hit those with a hammer, tunk, 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 and it'll begin to drive it out of the front of the rack and pinion. You don't have to take the rack off the car. Just drive it out. And then when you go to put it back in, make sure that you either spin the shaft. We had a lathe, it was so handy. Spin the lathe and you'd sand that area down where you leave some marks of the vice grips on the pinion. Or you just, you can use a die grinder and just sand them off too. Now that that's out, of course, you can change the seal on the rack and pinion. So, it keeps going, but yeah, anyway.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. John, what you just said about the tappet covers, is that generally true, or is that like the 1800 engine, or all of them?
That's MGA through the front one on the MGA through the 1980 MGB. The gaskets that you get are just, I swear, they've either been sitting in a bin too long and they've shrunk, or they were made incrementally. They're just too small. So they always leak. The rear one, the later rear one later rear ones have got a trough. You got a big thick orange gasket that goes in there. That ain't gonna leak. But the front ones always do. So any excuse you got the manifolding off. And that's back to Jim was pulling his engine. Do you take all that stuff off or do you leave it all on? Quite frankly, I would take it all off. Starter motors off, alternators off, even the oil filter assemblies off. And then the whole manifolding on the side, and then you're only dealing with the engine. And when you put everything back together, you can make it look all nice and pretty. So, but we've got this clutch, which started off being a weekend project, now pushed into 2 or 3 weekends. So
yeah,
speaking of the oil filter assembly, put a new gasket in against the block.
There's no end to this. Yes, that's absolutely true.
You just gotta tell me to buy a new car.
No, you're on a great way to this car being wonderful.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll be up in Watkins Glen for the Vintage Grand Prix Fest, and they're honoring MG this year. So
Great.
It should be a fun run.
So
thank you all.
If you're around there, you can come down to Altoona, PA. That's the last weekend before Labor Day. So drive
right.
Central Pennsylvania. It's in the email that I sent out. Central Pennsylvania British Car Fest, 30th annual, I think. So they've been doing it a long time. Greg Fisher, I got my 78B on the road last week after 40 years in storage. I guess we should have done this 2 weeks ago. And 7 years, of a complete restoration. I have a few questions regarding my steering rack and brake servo. So Greg Fisher, are you on? You still on?
I am. I am
Right.
on. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's a little bit gravelly, but that's all right. So what's the scoop with the rack and pinion? We'll take that first.
Well, the racket pinions seem to be a little stiff. And so I put some extra shims in. Probably, it just seemed like a lot to me. It's gotten better. I had lined it up when I put the thing together. I mean, this was a complete nut and bolt restoration. Took me 7 years to do.
Okay.
But I lined it up with all the right tools and did this. But I had to, right at the last minute, drop the steering column down to get a piece of the dash in that was interfering with a piece of the dash for a minute. And then I bolted it back up. And I just don't know if I knocked this thing out of alignment, and that's what's causing it to be a little
you got these you got the two things coming together on an angle, right? You got the column and you got the pinion. So one of the cheap tricks, the reason the steering is stiff is either the right kingpin is tight, the left kingpin is tight, the rack and pinion is tight, the rack and pinion is misplaced. One of those. So let's assume that the kingpins are nice and floppy. Shouldn't assume anything, but let's assume that they're nice and floppy. And so take the 4 bolts that hold the rack and pinion in place and just slacken them way off. And now feel the wheel. Does the wheel spin real nicely now? I mean, a whole lot more easily? Oh, then that means that the rack and pinion is in the wrong place. So how do you get it back in the right place? Aside from buying those pointy things. What we did at the shop, just fast, just combat. 2 people, one person's inside, turning the steering wheel, two and a half turns, lock to lock, back and forth, back and forth. And they've got a feel for how tight it is. And you're tightening up 1, 2, 3, 4, half a turn at a time, the bolts up front. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then your buddy goes, whoa, something just got tight. So you back that one off, take a 5/16 lock flat washer, thin one, snip a pie shape out of it, shove it in between the rack and pinion and the front cross member, and continue tightening. And that will tend to get that rack angled correctly. The other thing is it is filled up with oil, right? You took the top plate off and you filled the rack up with the GL4 8090 gear oil.
I did initially when I refurbished the rack, and it did leak a little bit, but I thought that was just around the boots, and I maybe have overfilled it. I guess I could go back and double check again. I thought I refilled it again when I put it on, but this is a long project, and so.
Yeah, so it's probably that. If it's not, it could be one of the kingpins is tight. I mean, it could be, shouldn't be, but some, that'll cause a drag. You can't get it to turn nicely. But when you're out driving it, and you turn, you're going down the road at 30 miles an hour, and you turn the wheel and let it go, it should pop itself back straight because of the caster angle. So, yeah. Then, okay, so how about the brake servo? What's up?
So the brake servos seem a similar type of a problem in that they seem really stiff. Now, the brake servo is supposed to assist, right? I mean, I know it's
right.
It's not my 2020 Dodge Ram.
So there's a big difference in the height of the pedal and how the pedal feels. between when the engine's running and when the engine's off. So when you turn the engine off and pump it a couple of times, that lets all the vacuum out. And then the pedal's like rock hard. Should be, I mean, you've got a little bit of free play, you know, movement where you're moving the shoes and stuff, but when you're all done with that, it goes rock hard. And then you start up the car and they get squishy again. If you don't get that squishy, then something's going on. There has been a problem with the master cylinders and the servos. The pin from the servo is supposed to come out a certain distance and fit into the master cylinder. And if it's too close or too far away, it'll give you unusual brake feelings. So you can give me a jingle tomorrow. We can go over some more of that in real detail. And it's also in your owner's or your workshop manual, because that thing is supposed to stick out of the end of the that push rod is supposed to stick out of the end of the servo by 0.47 inches. It's a real bizarre, well, maybe it's metric or something, but anyway, it's I had a little device to check that always when we're doing it, and I know some of the new servos, they're not adjusted correctly. So if
that's a 32nd less than a half inch, so that's why you're looking for it.
Yeah. Okay. I can't do that in my head.
So what I was thinking of, because I you know, again, I took this servo apart and cleaned it all up, wanted to paint it, make it look really nice.
Okay.
And put it back together. I just was wondering, maybe I put it back together wrong, and I just didn't know if there's a way to test the servo.
Well,
or if I did something wrong when I put it back together.
Just that squish, just the squish, and of course it shouldn't hiss. You should never hear it hiss. Maybe when you press on the brakes and let up on them or something, you hear it hiss. Is it sucks fresh air in to replace the air that's been drawn out by the intake manifold. So that I just did one down in Katy, Texas. The car is running rough, and the number 3 and 4 cylinders had leaned out because air was going into the intake manifold and leaning out the 3 and 4. I took a pair of pliers and just squeezed the hose that went from the manifold to the servo, and the car slowed down and it got smoother. So we knew that air was getting through that servo. But I don't think doesn't sound like that's the problem you've got, but that's another trick you can do. So.
Hey, John.
All right, great, thanks.
Crystal.
He said he rebuilt his rack and pinion. Is it possible that he tightened the nut to the tie rod end so it wasn't floppy, and that tightens it down too much so that the steering is stuck?
Well, you mean the inner tie rod, so that we didn't talk about that, but the inner tie rod is supposed to be fully articulated. I mean, the tie rod, you should be able to turn that tie rod by hand, to screw into the tie rod end. But the inner tie rod, did you have those apart, Greg?
Yeah, I had just about everything apart. I did not rebuild the rack and pinion. Everything seemed to work right, so all I did was clean it up. Okay. And I didn't.
Yeah, usually.
It is a good feeling.
So okay.
So I was going to say it's a good feeling to have this thing working after 40 years of sitting in my garage.
Yeah,
my wife's happy about that.
Yeah.
So
40 years.
I bought it new off a lot. We dated to get in that car, and then I parked it when she got pregnant with our first daughter, and she's 39 this year. So it's been there a long time. And I finally got to it. And well, I've talked over the years about this project, and it was a good feeling to get it running and get it on the road, and just a few little things. And I don't think the brakes are dangerous. It's just they're not what I think they should feel like. And the steering is good, but not as good as it should be. And I'm just wondering if it's one of the guys that helped me really dial in the carburetor. He said steering feels a little tough. He says put some of the shims inside the where you take the cap off and drop all the different shims in there. And he says see if that helps, and it helped a little bit. And I'm thinking maybe I need.
That would be weird unless you'd actually lost shims when you had it apart when you were doing something before. So, because they over a period of time that they get loose, they don't get tight. But anyway, so those are some hints.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Let's see, Steve from Aiken, South Carolina. Hey, good for you, Steve. Glad to have you on here. Marty, reviving your MG. Steve from Aiken, you have a new number. No, the old number is good. Try me again sometime. David Massey says Ozium spray, O-Z-I-U-M. Whatever is Ozium spray, David Massey?
You were talking about how to get the smell of the.
Oh, okay. And that's something you buy at Walmart? Or is it? It's a.
Yeah, you can get it anywhere. How did you describe it? It eats it's an enzyme, I think.
Okay. I had to write it down and had to remember how to spell enzyme. I don't write that much. Not enzyme. So yeah.
You see the word enzyme in there? No, I couldn't do it either. So I just put a
Miami. Thank you very much. Thanks. Let's see, Jim Riley, can we get some details on your upcoming visit to Altoona, PA? No updated info on the PA website. So Jim, are you on tonight? Jim Pastor? You on tonight?
I'm here.
Okay, so Jim is the organizer. So Jim Riley, Jim Pastor, you guys can correspond, but anyway, Jim, just say a few things about the show because it's such a great show.
Sure, thank you. 30th year, 30th anniversary. The reason that nothing has been posted on the site yet is we were having an issue with hotel rooms because Penn State, because of the leap year, Penn State and St. Francis, the local universities, they all moved their move-in date to our weekend, which hotel rooms become a premium here. So we finalized that today. So we should have the information out there, but it's August. John comes in on the 22nd for seminar on the Thursday and Friday, the 23rd. That would be the 22nd and 23rd, excuse me. Then 24th, 25th, which is Saturday, Sunday, is pretty much the whole weekend. We have things planned for Saturday all day. We have a tour. We actually this year we're going to include a tour of the Railroads Museum, John, which a lot of people have never been to. It'll be included in the price of admission for everybody that comes. And then Saturday evening we do a dinner, we do a mountain tour, and Sunday we have a car show with chicken dinner. So it's a good time. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, my email address is mgnut@atlanticbb.net, and you could check out our website is pabritishcar.com. pabritishcar.com.
Jim, thank you very, very kindly.
Sure.
Thanks very much.
Or give me a call, Jim, if you want.
What's the number?
814-931-0627.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Jim, thank you for distinguishing yourself for the Jim Riley in Syracuse or whatever it was. I was confusing you with the Jim Riley who's now down in Florida, the Healy man.
Nope, I'm strictly MGs.
Yep, there we go. True blue. So, Mr. Neary, DJ Neary, every fall when I put up my MGB, I slide a metal lint filter for a washing machine over the tailpipe, and that keeps them out of the muffler. I remember taking an engine apart one time, junk car, probably. We used to, oh my gosh, we used to, at the height, I bet we took in one car a month, one car every other month. It was too rusted to repair. We'd take it apart into its component pieces. I'd have my high school kids do that. And we'd end up with pieces we could sell, and they learned how the cars worked. I remember taking the cylinder head off an engine, and there was a tuft of mouse house down inside one of the cylinders. Oh my gosh. So that's pretty bizarre. So, Neil has asked me if I suggest changing the gearbox oil. Yes, as often as you change the differential oil. That's all. That's, how often? Once every 5 years? Once every 12,000 miles? Yep. And the gearbox oil on everything except the T-types and midget 1500s is either 20W50. Don't buy the expensive oil because it's got the high zinc. You just need that for the cam and the engine. You can buy just good oil to go in the gearbox. But John Esposito at Quantum Mechanics says, oh my God, make sure you use 30 weight non-detergent, especially with overdrives. So whichever. Workshop manual calls for 2050. And then the midget 1500 and the T series take 90 weight gear oil. If you put 90 weight gear oil in the 1275, it really makes them quiet too.
Hey, John, can you talk about the aeration of that oil like I asked you on the email?
So Fred sends me this picture. They just run the car, and these drain the oil. You drain this hot oil out of the gearbox, and it looks like molasses. I mean, except it's all filled with bubbles. The color's gone weird on it because of all the air in it and everything. That's just natural. All those gears in there, spraying that oil all over it. I think if you waited an hour or two and then changed the oil, I think it would come back to more of a normal picture. But Fred had the question, like, is this weird or what? But I think that aeration just happens naturally.
I just, after 40 years or so, 50 years in the industry, I never saw that. I never noticed it anyway.
Normally, the car would be sitting for a while before you drain the oil out of it. So I think that's it altogether. But that's what Esposito was talking about, is that if you get all those little tiny bubbles in an overdrive, then you can't get any hydraulic pressure if you're making bubbles smaller. So let's see, just a minute here. What else we got? Marty's got one on restoration on a midget. Bradley Schwartz, do you have any experience with conductivity meters to measure the water content in brake fluid? No, I don't. I've never used anything like that. I don't even use a borescope in an engine to see what's wrong with it. No, we always just flush the master cylinder. We'd pump each corner, I don't know, 10 times. And the one corner maybe 10 times and the other corner 3. And then the bleed the calipers maybe 10 times. That was enough to wash all the fluid out of there. But I've never checked the fluid for water. I've just assumed there's water in there. So let's see, we're going on here. John Cathy, long-term storage, 10 years. What about the rust in the cylinders on the two when the valves are open? Sometimes the engine freezes. Oh, I didn't talk about that. let me back up here. If the engine is frozen, you pulled your car out 17 years later, the engine's frozen, it will not turn over. So you strip down the right-hand side of the engine, T-types, midgets, the works. And you get the starter motor out of the way, the oil filter out of the way, the alternator, the generator, whatever, out of the way. Take the plugs out, fill the cylinders with deep creep or breakaway or WD-40 or whatever you've chosen to do, and then use a long, great big long bar between the backing plate and the teeth on the flywheel. And you try to turn the flywheel one way. Pull on this lever, and you try to turn the flywheel, try to turn it one way, try to turn it the other. Doesn't move, come back the next day, try it. Doesn't move, try it the next day. Does it move? No, try it the next day. Eventually it will move. And then you walk the engine around with your big bar, walk it around one time, and then you can put the starter motor back in, but be cautious. Maybe you get the brakes working, you put a strap on the front of the car and tow it around the block at 30 miles an hour in second gear, and those pistons are all going up and down, and now it's great. So you fire it up, fire it up, drive it, see what's going on. All of a sudden you find, oh yeah, you're using a lot more oil. Well, okay, then plan for an engine rebuild. But just because the engine's frozen, don't rebuild it there. Wait, maybe just by the stroke of luck, you can break the engine free. And I've never failed in getting an engine free, just like I've never failed in getting a clutch disconnected. That's a lie. One time, 1,500 midgets, same car. It'd been underwater, I think. We just gave up on it, on trying to get the engine free. But all the rest of the time, it works. It's just great. You just got to be cautious if you've got oil down in those cylinders and you put a starter motor on it, because all of a sudden it's like nice and free, and you go, I don't have to tow it. I'm just going to spin it over the starter motor. All that junk that's in the cylinder comes out at about 100 miles an hour out of the spark plug holes, and it can surprise you and get you very wet with oil or worse. So,
John, I had an
Go ahead.
Just gonna say, I don't know if you ever heard this. I had an interesting thing happen back in the 60s. I bought a Pontiac that sat for a long time, but it started, it ran, and I went down the highway and it was blowing orange smoke for a while, but it didn't burn oil after that. But it just sat. There must have been a lot of rust in there.
You take the cheapest, easiest, simplest way out. What's the best way? Well, I guess the best way is to take the engine out and spend, $7,000 on it and have it all redone. But I mean, geez, why? If it's only going to blow, orange smoke, only blow orange smoke for a couple miles until it gets out of its system, then you can deal with it later.
One caution I was going to say is that if the engine turns, then turn it through by hand. I had an engine like this on a 72B that a guy gave me, and it would turn through to a certain point and then stop, and turn back the other way to a certain point, it would stop. Turned out that one of the push rods, the valve was stuck closed, and so if you were to spin that through, you'd bend a push rod. So you have to be careful about spinning one through.
I've never seen a frozen valve like that, except on my own car once when it stuck. One of those phosphor bronze valve guys when they gall up the valves.
I had a TF that a friend has sitting for a long time, and we got it running. It was running fine, but it has so much old gasoline that was on the valve stems, on the intake valves, that they began to stick. One stuck closed, one stuck open.
Oh, geez.
So we bent a push rod and had to change that out.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Recommendations on good, reasonably priced battery chargers. Jim Riley in Syracuse. So Battery tenders, those are the best ones. Those are not chargers, they're tenders. It's got to be charged up relatively high to have the tender work, but the battery tender is your friend. You can leave, you can screw it in under the bonnet. You can have the plug hanging out of the grill. You don't mind driving around with the plug hanging, and then when you come in, you just plug the thing in or open the bonnet and plug it in. That's what I did with my daughter's car when I built it with a tender. But you know, geez, I don't know. They all have. Everybody's got battery tenders out there. I don't know one better one than another.
John.
Alan.
Yeah, Alan here. Just gonna say, when I grew up in Minnesota, every car had a plug hanging out of the grill. They were the heaters. Every one of them had them. Can I throw in a couple questions, or?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt things.
No,
here.
that's fine.
Okay, several years ago, quite a few years ago, I think it's back when you're on Fulton Street, you had replacement leaf springs for MGB.
Yes.
They were great. You know, they have an extra leaf in them, I think.
Yep.
And right now, I think I need new rear leaf springs for my MGC. Now, I've noticed that in the Moss catalog, they have a different number than the MGB ones. I don't know if there's a critical difference or not. And the other part of the question, the other part of the question was, can you still get those?
Yeah, State Spring on South Division. You know, if you were to drive over here and drop them off, you know, at State Spring, you just tell them to add a leaf about a foot long, you know, and we always told them to replace the second leaf. Just don't argue with me. Just replace the second leaf. The main leaf, of course, got the curls in the end to hold the bushings.
Yeah.
Replace the second leaf, add a leaf, and you know, you come back and back in the day, you know, they were $65 a set, and then I suppose probably 150 now for a set. But it's just you get back a set of springs that are going to work. They're tried. They're not tried. I'm not even sure they're tested, but they'll work. And it's very different from buying them. It just all the suppliers have a terrible time with leaf springs. The quality of them, but getting those rebuilt. But chances are you've got a spring shop close to you, in Bay City, in you know, around there, Port Huron, because all trucks need springs all the time, and that's the thinnest spring that they dealt with. So. But if you can't find somebody local, you can come over here. I'll call me. I'll give you the info on it. Although I think their phone number is probably on my website under recommended suppliers. Is something State Spring should be.
I put the link in.
Okay, thanks, Marty.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. A couple other questions if you got time.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't want to just say I eat up someone else's time. Okay. A friend of mine, Bruce Mann, maybe you know him. Bruce called me the other day and he was wondering about valve lash when you were breaking in a new engine, you know, just when you first started up. And he had heard, I think Forrest Johnson had told him, open the valve clearances up to about 25 thousandths. And he was wondering if that was a good idea. And I can't imagine how it could hurt, but
it can hurt. Absolutely not.
It can't.
No.
Absolutely.
No.
If you don't follow the cam contours, if you don't stay on the ramps, off and on that cam lobe, you will beat it and break in, it will die.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's what, that's what you guys are recommending.
Well, I still, I tell everybody, until tonight, I haven't been corrected. I tell everybody to put 30 thousandths, run it in for 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, at 2000 RPM, just stand there next to the engine, just in that everything's loose, everything can rotate. The lifters can rotate, the push rods can rotate. And then at the end of that, then you retorque the head and bring the valves back down to 15.
Right, okay.
That,
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's the critical period for break-in against the scrub and gall that you can get between
Yeah.
the iron of the lifter and the iron of the cam. And those take-up ramps, which are designed to run at the lash, the specified lash.
Uh-huh.
If you don't pay attention to them, then you are picking up the lifter after the lash and dropping it down like a hammer before it fades out and sets it on the seat.
Yeah.
I wonder if that
Standard
makes
lash.
a difference at those speeds though, at 2,000 RPM. I mean, maybe that would account for something a lot worse at higher. So I've always done that, but I'm interested. I'm interested in chasing that some more, because I tell everybody to do it the way that I've been doing it for such a long time.
Okay,
And
I just,
if
yeah,
it's
I had,
wrong, if
I'll
I'm
be
wrong,
happy to talk to you off,
Yeah, okay.
side bar whenever you want.
Yeah, okay. All
okay,
right.
yeah. I was just wondering why they didn't mention that in the Haynes manual. But there are lots of mistakes in the Haynes manual.
So, well, there are some. One of the tricks for driving your car in a parade, our cars are not made for parades. If you open up that valve lash to 30 thousandths, it'll tick over 400 RPM. It'll go really slow.
Okay.
So,
But it will really not be very good for the moments that the cam encounters the lifter.
Okay.
And when the cam is on the way back down, it drops the valve on the seat a little sudden.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm interested in learning more about this.
Okay,
Thanks.
very good. And okay, finally, you're talking about transmission oil.
Mhm.
A friend of mine is recommending MT90.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard people say, "Oh my God, is that what's MT90? Is that?"
It's a red line.
Yeah, I've heard of that. And then the guys that sell AMSOIL, of course, are always claiming that their oil does great things too. And I just got an oil supplement. I just was handed an oil supplement this weekend that's not commercially available, to experiment with that. So any oil's better than no oil.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be 20, 50 or around 30 weight, but MT90 must mean 90 weight. But
It's actually when you're talking about SAE engine oil weights, it's 40 weight. 90 gear oils are on a different scale.
Right.
90 is pretty much 40 weight.
Okay. All right. So So anyway, and some of those oils have got some lubrication stuff in them that produces less heat out of the gearbox. I'm always worried about how it might make the synchros work better or worse. But anyway, yeah, that's fine.
No, okay, great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Uh-huh.
All right, so now we're down to, yes.
Just quick on the battery chargers. It took me a minute to find it. The Noco Genius 10 amp battery charger will charge. It does the 4-stage charging, which does the float charge and trickle charge. It desulfurs batteries. It's a 12-volt power supply, so you can take a dead battery, put it on power supply. It'll get it started, and put in a desulfate mode to clean the battery, and then put it into the smart charge mode to finish it off. They're a little expensive. They're about $100, but they'll take a dead battery and bring it back.
What's the trade name again?
Noco, N-O-C-O.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
So they're a smart battery charger that'll take a dead battery and put juice into it so that you only need one charger.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mark Turchak.
Have you actually done that with the NOCO? Used it on a dead battery? Because I tried with mine and I could not get any charge, and I had to use a conventional charger to get a little bit in there before I switched to the NOCO.
The Genius 10 has a power supply mode. So
Oh,
just
okay. I have a
supply 12
Genius.
volts.
I have a Genius 5. That's the difference.
Yeah, so it has that power supply mode. I did have one battery that I ran down, but it wasn't down very long. So I was able to bring it back and it seemed to do okay.
Yeah, but Cabela's wants $325 for that little sucker. And I could drive my car an awful lot and keep the battery charged off the generator. $125 will buy me a year's worth of gasoline.
I'm with you, Judd.
You can find them on the Jungle site for about $100.
Okay. Let's see, Mark Turchak, I'm wondering if my thermostat is stuck closed. I started my MGB after having it sit for a while. It started right up, but then the temp went to hot. The upper part of the radiator did not seem to heat up. I'm pretty sure I replaced my thermostat last year. So either, Mark, you haven't got enough water in the cooling system. What year and model do you have? Are you still on?
Yeah, it's a 1976. And yeah, I
MGB?
started it up. It started right up. I did notice, and what you didn't mention is after it start up after not running for a little while, you should check under the car to see if anything's leaking. I did see a little puddle of water, but it wasn't like everything leaked out. So I may have a loose hose. So I may have lost some coolant. But I filled it up. I let it cool down. I filled it up again. It wasn't too low, I don't think. But the fact that the upper part of the radiator seemed to be cool.
Yeah,
So I'm
so
wondering if it's flowing through because it goes from the top down to the bottom, right?
it comes out of the top of the engine where it's the hottest, goes into the top of the radiator, goes down through the radiator, gets sucked off the bottom of the radiator by the water pump, and then pushed into the block where it goes through the block willy-nilly and then comes up into the head and comes back out of the thermostat again. Thermostats can and do stick closed.
Okay. So, I mean, a new thermostat and a gasket's pretty cheap, right? So maybe I could check that out, or
it's so cheap that they're not made well. So new thermostat, buy a 195 thermostat, put it into a pan on the stove, and just make sure it opens just before it goes into boil. Or if you've got a thermometer that's good enough, you can actually watch it. Also, the other thing that's really important is to drill a breather hole in the flat disc outside of the valve, right? I mean, you got the disc, and then in the middle of the disc is the valve in. So out someplace out on the edge there, drill an 1/8 inch hole so that when you do go to put coolant back in there, the air doesn't get trapped in the cylinder head. The air can actually get out into the radiator. They used to do that on all radiators. They don't do it on.
Is that a hole in the thermostat you're saying, or?
Yep. Just on
Yeah, that I would have said a 16th inch hole in the thermostat and then orient the thermostat so that's at the top. But my question about the B cooling system there is, are you filling it in the that little touchy can on the side, or are you filling
No,
it?
I don't have one of those. I don't
76.
have an overflow. And I fill it through the radiator.
Yeah.
So I take the cap off.
Okay, that should
I
allow
don't
you
have-
to immerse the thermostat, and that's the critical part.
Okay. Oh, and you're supposed to leave the radiator cap off after filling. This is a 1976.
Well, sure, because there's always air in there some places,
Yeah.
and it just helps it bubble out. That's all. It'll bubble out anyway.
But for you to monitor while it's bubbling out, they don't run away and just figure it's going to fix it. You're supposed to add when the bubbles come up so it keeps it full.
Yeah, never start your car and walk away from it. That's never.
Oh, no.
That's
Not
never a
this car.
good idea. Never a good idea.
So
Yeah.
you said a 1/4 inch? No, not 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch.
I said an 1/8 inch hole. Bob Moore says air is so small, a 16th inch hole will work, but I was drilling 1/8.
Okay, I'll do that. Oh, and I found this.
Oh, look at that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
right after 1987. So I got this right after I got the car.
Very cool.
Hey, John, what I've done to keep make sure I don't get a lot of air when I'm filling the radiator, I put a reverse flush kit right after the heater control valve.
Sure.
Leave the cap off and just fill it until then when you see the fluid before it sprays out, you put the cap on. I seldom have to refill that, but it gets most of the air out. It really
Yeah.
works nice. And then when
Well-
you need to flush it, that's a nice thing to have.
Perfect.
When you're filling right through the radiator, it's hardly ever a problem, except with an MGC. With an MGC, you can get a massive part inside the cylinder head where the coolant does not go. It's real frustrating.
Is there a maneuver for that, John? Does it jack
Yeah,
up the front end or something like that to get the bubble?
Something,
to
yeah,
move out?
there was something that we did. There's a fitting on top of the head that we took off. You're not, I think the MGC's got some threaded holes in the head itself. We did something. We had one that just couldn't sort it out. Just one ever, but we just couldn't sort it out, and it would get hot all the time. And also, we found that it was found that there was a hot spot there. So.
I've got a guy who's got that problem, so that's why I asked.
Okay.
We just put a new radiator in that MGC, Bob, and Drew says it's not heating up now, but I'm wondering, John, if it's got like a bubble or a block or something in the head, would that show up as overheating on the thermostat? I mean, on the temperature sensor on gauge?
On the temp gauge, that's what it did with ours. You know, I mean, you got all that water that's coursing through there, but yeah, there was something. There's somehow we knew that it was getting way too hot, and it was such a simple thing to fix at the time. The other problem with the MGC is that you've got a hole in the bottom left front of the block about as big around as your thumb, and it can have a lot of flashing on it. You take off a cover and you can put a tool in there with a die grinder and open. It's like carpal tunnel. Open that hole up. I got to keep going here. I still got some more notes on here. We'll be on till 10 tonight. Bill Fronde, John, I started the process of replacing my heater core on my 72 MGB, but got frustrated and moved on to another project. Is the written procedure and hints somewhere that I can consult? So, Bill, are you still on? Are you still struggling with a heater core? If someone knows Bill, tell him.
Yeah, I'm here, John.
Check that heater core, because almost always they're always okay. Unless, I mean, it's the hose that gets loose and it squirts into the inside of the heater box. So put out some fittings on there right now, and get a mighty vac or draw a vacuum on that, and just see if in fact it really is faulty. I mean, if it is, oh my God, if it is faulty, you got to change it. But if it isn't, you don't have to change it. You just have to get better hose clamps. And it's a real common error to make. So to get the heater box out of there, the bonnet comes off, the tubes I think in the front come off underneath, the wire, the cable that does the flapper, that comes off. You pry the thing out and you yank it out of there with that cable. But oh my, you can stand in the engine bay and yank on it. Oh my God. And then when you put it back in, you get the new pieces of rubber that go around it, and you just gob those with Sill Glide from Napa, so that heater box slips right back into place again. But what a terrible project that is. Unless you cheat and just take the front of the cover, and you can cut the metal. It sounds horrible, but you can do it. Cut the metal down where the maybe it's at the top. I think maybe at the top, and you can cut the metal on the outside and just bend it. And you can't bend it back and have it look perfect. It's such a horrible thing to do. But I remember seeing them that had been taken out without changing the heater matrices without taking the whole heater box out, but oh my God. So anyway.
We cut the lip on the bottom and it came
Okay.
right, and you can't tell. I mean, nobody knows
That's a
except.
good idea. Right along the bottom, cut it right
Yeah.
along the bottom and it just pulls straight out. Yes, what a wonderful idea. Thank you. Yep, all right. Yep. It's wrong. But the alternative is so horrid.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to, I've got to keep moving here. Meisels, 1980 MGB. I replaced the rubber boot on my driver's side emergency brake. Heavy resistance, but I got it on. But after a few days, I noticed a lot of brake fluid had leaked onto the floor. What damage might I have done to the rear brake? I don't know, only that now the cylinder is moving. It wasn't moving before. Now it's moving. It was going to leak anyway. It was nothing you did. Don't assume responsibility for it, but you must replace the cylinder and the shoes. And of course, this is the perfect time to change the rear hub oil seal all at the same time. That was our most popular repair at University Motors, is rear brakes. So, Steve Olson, you can preserve your marriage by buying your own turkey baster at the dollar store. Thank you. Yep, it's cheaper than the divorce lawyer. Okay, all right. Okay. Tom to everybody, why is the rear bleed screw on an early B at the bottom of the brake cylinder? Because it still works, because with enough pressure, it'll push that stuff out. So
Thank you. That's great to know.
I mean, it's just that it's like on a slave. Some of the new slave cylinders, the bleed hole isn't at 12 o'clock. It's real close. It's not at 12 o'clock when it's mounted on the gearbox. So you bleed it until you don't get any more air out. Then you open the bleeder and take with your left hand and push against the lever and the push rod, and you push the fluid out with your hand. You open the bleeder, you push, you close the bleeder before it hits the bottom, and just the violence of all that fluid moving will push the air out, even though it was trapped at the top. So that's the same idea. Scott Lynn says Motors has a comparison of silicone versus conventional brake fluid, and he's got the link here. So that's interesting. I'm going to hit my mute all button here. There we go. Scott Lynn also says, I take my car to track days at the racetrack, and silicone fluid is not used there due to its compressibility up to 3. I got something in the way. I can't read this. Like up to 3 times more than conventional fluid. Plus, I use high temp conventional fluid. That's interesting. I didn't realize that it wasn't popular on the racetrack. That's nice to know. And we're down to Mike, 56 MGA, still in barn find condition, 18 years. Who might refurbish the wire wheels? Don't. Just, I mean, if they're straight, then sandblast them and paint them. But if they're you can't buy the spokes for as much as you can. You can't buy spokes and respoke it for less money than a new wheel. And even if you do, the inner hub is worn. It just doesn't make sense. So you can do a lot with a can of spray paint if they're straight, and you can tell if they're straight simply by spinning them on the car on a front hub that's spinning freely. Tires, of course, are trash, but you can take a jack stand and you can put a screwdriver and a vice grip on a screwdriver up against the wheel and tell if the wheel's doing this. Is it spinning? So. Are there solid wheels that will fit on knockoff hubs? Yes, those are the aluminum wheels. They take a spline, and they're not disc wheels, but they're aluminum spokes. They got 4 or 5 spokes on them. Mini lights, that was the trade name from so many years ago. And everything is a copy of a mini light now. Lee Gilbert.
Also, Acme Speed Shop sells them.
Okay, Acme Speed, and that's they're out of Georgia?
I
Yes.
think so, yeah. It's Hap Waltrip.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Who's out of Greenville, South Carolina?
Greenville, South Carolina. It's a pretty
Okay.
nice kit.
And then you've also got, I mean, if you're gonna buy new wire wheels, you buy them, yeah, I do it any way you want, but if you buy them from Alan Hendricks, he'll put the tires you want on the rims, get them tightened up and get them aligned and then shave them. And when you get them back, it's expensive. When you get them back from Alan, it's like driving on glass. It's just unbelievable. Okay, Lee Gilbert, if the engine is out of a 79B, can you remove the heater box to access the interior of the heater box to free the flap inside? That's about the only way to do it. The other way to free the flap, which gets frozen in there, is to disconnect the cable from the heater box. You got to take the deflector off. Then you got to stuff your aged rotund body into the passenger footwell and use a 2BA and a 4BA socket. American stuff will work in its place, and pull that cable out, and then or maybe not even that. Maybe disconnect the heater control on the dash and use a pair of vice grips. A two-person project, pushing and pulling the inner cable, and somebody is down there with a screwdriver trying to help that thing move, but don't push it too hard because then it'll break off. But it's when that freezes, that's a real bugger in there.
And don't buckle that inner cable because it will never be right after that.
Yeah. Do wind blockers work? The one that sits behind your seat? Absolutely, they work. It's incredible. Any difference between Moss part and the Chicagoland do-it-yourself blocker? Don't know, probably not. I mean, it all has to do with putting up a screen about that high behind you. I mean, you can order from Moss, it'll be here in 3 days. Or you can make one out of acrylic in the hardware stores.
Okay,
thanks a lot.
Hey, John?
Oh, yeah, Lee. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I say thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Somebody else came in. Who is that, Crystal?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had bought the wind blocker from Cabrio. And basically with Cabrio, you can also have them color coordinated to your car, which is really kind of cool.
That's cool.
It has the black mesh, which is a lot better than a solid plexiglass. The solid plexiglass really still brings the air up and moves your hair around, whereas the black mesh really blocks it quite well.
What's the name of that place, Crystal?
It's Cabrio. I'll go ahead and put a link on the side there to them.
I got it.
Thanks a lot there, Marty.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen the mesh one. I've only ever seen the plexiglass one. So that's interesting. So
Can I say something about Crystal? We finally met her at down in Texas. And I'll tell you, her car was immaculate. I mean, I was impressed with that car and impressed with Crystal. So nice to hear from you, Crystal.
Thank you, Bob and Gloria. Appreciate it. You guys really had nice, kind words at the end of the show there too. Thank you. Had me embarrassed.
So now we got a note from SJ who says, sorry, no mic or camera. Started my car midwinter and it had a bit of a smoky exhaust. As far as I know, it was pretty tight when I put it to bed. Don't worry about it. Just the smoky exhaust might just be steam. You might be confusing steam for smoke. And until you get it out and take it for a hard run, hey, don't worry about it. You can buy it, even if it smokes a little bit, you can buy a lot of oil for as much as it costs to repair an engine. John Lynn, 76 Midget, update, changed head gasket and finally got it restarted. Problem was lack of vacuum. Solution was refit intake and exhaust manifolds and continue to tighten even when you think it won't tighten anymore. There is also a torque sequencing pattern, tower nuts first and work cross pattern outwards. Okay, that was from last week or the time before, where the car just wouldn't start, and I guessed, I think, on that too much air was getting in someplace and leaning out the mixture so it wouldn't start. By the way, in the process, I discovered spark plug wire to number 4 cylinder had a spot that was worn through and leaked the spark, probably the cause of an intermittent pulsing at idle. So weird stuff happens. Carl Heidemann took I still got a lot of stuff to go through. Carl Heidemann took in either an MGB or a TR6 in his shop in Holland, Michigan. And the guy says, I'm sick of this thing. I want a Weber carburetor. I want a different cam, because he'd spent a whole lot of money on it and it wouldn't run right. Carl moved the hose to the oil cooler, which was sitting too close to the coil, and every now and then, why? I don't know. Every now and then, the spark would jump from the coil to the mesh on the oil cooler hose. So Carl moved the oil cooler hose and solved all the problems. So sometimes it's just something really simple, like a hole in a spark plug that leaks that. Buddy Robson, new clutch master cylinder on my 69 MGC has a shorter fork shaft than the original. Can it be installed with a spacer between the cylinder and the pedal box? No, you're still limited on the amount of movement that you've got there. You end up having to get a longer push rod somehow, some way. You either got to scab the one out of your old master cylinder. We used to, on midget 1500s, we used to turn the pedal red hot and bring the pedal up towards you by half an inch, and that would give you half an inch more movement. It's frustrating. I'll go to the defense of our suppliers, and they get something that they think will work, and it should work, and all the specs tell them it will work, but then there's something like, you're just missing an extra half an inch of movement on the master cylinder, and so it doesn't work in practice. It's really frustrating, but
okay, John, thanks very much.
Yeah. So
yeah, that was the question I had. The two pedals obviously didn't match up because of the shorter shaft. I have the old fork, but the clevis pin holes are pretty wallowed out. They're pretty worn. So, but I probably should just put that back in though, right?
So you could, it's hard to tell you what to do exactly, but the cheap trick is an oxyacetylene torch, and you just bend the pedal. Okay. But the next one is you jam it on the floor so much you dent the floor, so the pedal will go farther into the floor.
Yeah, it goes all the way with the shorter shaft. The pedal goes all the way to the floor, right up against the carpeting and the firewall.
Yeah. So I somehow, and you can always take your original cylinder, send it out to Apple Hydraulics or White Post Restoration. There goes a quick $250, right? But it'll
worth it.
Used to work, it'll work again. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got the replacement clutch master from Robert Kirk early last year.
Okay, you can't send that back.
Yeah, well, he's
that's what I meant. That's what I meant. He died, so whatever warranty was expressed or implied has ceased.
Well, I'm not worried about that. I just wasn't sure about removing the spacer, if that would take care of it. But I had a feeling it wouldn't, and sounds like
how thick is that spacer between the?
It's almost an inch wide. It's almost an inch thick. This is on a 69 MGC.
So you don't want to ruin the spacer. So instead, take long bolts and put flat washers on them and make it 3/4 of an inch thick. Give yourself 3/4 of an inch of space, or just to see if it works. Or take a piece of pipe, a pipe nipple, and cut that, and then just put a bolt through it. So you haven't got a whole spacer. You just got two pipe nipples that are 3/4 of an
Yeah,
inch. And see
yeah,
if-
that's a
see
good
if
idea.
it
That's a
does
good
that.
idea.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
experiment.
so I would need to, in order to have it even with the brake pedal, I would have to reduce that spacer width by almost an inch.
Well, but remember, there's a ratio like 7-to-1 on the push rod. I mean, between the little part of the pedal up at the top and the long part of the pedal at the bottom. It's about a 7-to-1 ratio there, I think. 6 or 7-to-1. Anyway, experiment with it and see.
Yeah, that's an idea, cutting some tubes and trying that through the bolts between the
Before you take your aluminum spacer and have it changed in dimension. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, it might be better to just try to see if I can get a new shaft, but I don't know where I could find one.
You gotta take that master cylinder and you gotta go take it apart, and you gotta take it to someone and say, replace the shaft here, or take your original one and that one and make something out of it, or I don't know, something.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll have to play around with it.
Okay,
It definitely wasn't the same as the way it was before when I took the original out.
Right.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. So Brad Schwartz reminds us that isopropyl alcohol is a good solvent for cleaning brake fluid. Let's see, what's the next one here? Joe Smeds. What's the trick to getting the two inner manifold nuts started on a late MGB? Well, grease. I love grease. So if you take a screwdriver and a big screwdriver, you put a gob of grease on it, you put the nut on it, you can bring that screwdriver down and put that nut right at the end of the stud, and so it won't fall off. You can use a magnet too, but magnets are grease is at least as slippery. And then you can start to spin that nut with your finger. But I think you can put this is the middle ones on an MGB, late model B. You can put the washers on and the nut on, and then hang, and then put the manifold down over that. It doesn't have to go straight in. You can put the washers on and hang the manifold on it. So
Okay, well, I hadn't thought about trying to do it that way, but the grease seems like the way to go, actually.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's mechanics glue. You're trying to get the 8 lifted out fasteners, but behind the cockpit, after a paint job or something or other, like 4 of them go on easy schmeezy, right? And then the other ones I was like, how am I going to reach that? Well, you put a gob of grease on your finger, put the nut on that, and bring it up underneath, along with the lock washer, right? And you get it in the right place, and then you start it in the top.
I feel silly for not thinking of that, because I'm thinking of this. I was out playing with this earlier, and I decided to take, that's right, I take a break for the meeting, and it kind of occurred to me, well, grease.
So when I get jammed up, I'll call Glenn, or Paul Deershaw, Glenn at Glenn's MG Service, or Paul Deershaw at Sports Car Craftsman. When I get jammed up too, so
yeah,
it's like, oh, of course, and then first you say, oh, of course, of course.
Well, it's like it was sometime last year I got on a chance to ask you a question about a 77 MGB that I was dealing with, and it wouldn't start after it came up to temperature, and your response was immediate. It was like fuel was boiling in the float bowl. It's way too rich, and that's exactly what it was. So thank you again for that one. That certainly solved that issue with that car.
Glad I can help out.
Much appreciated.
Hey, you're welcome.
I'm going to give the grease a try with those nuts.
Yep. So we got a lot of notes on here now about the MT90 and the battery chargers and about the Central Pennsylvania event. And we are Acme Speed Shop. We've got, oh my God, we got Cabrio. Great call. Counted 184 tonight, Doug. Thank you. That's the number I wrote down exactly that I haven't. And then Rob said, who did you say had passed away? That was Robert Kirk, who supplied the MGC community with parts.
Yes.
So, you know, yeah, he passed. That's real sad. And no one seems, I don't own an MGC. I'm not wired in with a group, but no one seems to think that anything's happening quickly as far as his widow, his kids, or somebody taking it over, or what's going to happen to all the stuff he had. How much stuff did he have? I don't, it's all a mystery. I don't know. So.
Well, he also rebuilt the brake master for me.
Oh.
I may have been one of his last customers. I'm not sure, because it was not too long.
Oh gosh.
After that I heard that he had died.
I had mine rebuilt by him really late, and it took him way longer than he thought.
I had the same experience. Mine was a bit
he was
longer.
probably sick at the time.
Yeah.
Speculating.
Well, ladies or lady and gentlemen, we are at 9:39 and I'm done. I've gone through all the chat section. So we're not going to shut off quite yet. We usually go through 5 minutes of see you later. Let's see, when's our next seminar? I don't have my calendar out here. Oh my gosh. And where am I going to be? Nominally, it would be like the 6th, which is next week, and the 20th. So nominally, but I'm not going to be here the 6th.
No, it'll be the 13th.
So it's going to be the 13th. So, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, because you'll be in Minneapolis.
And then once the GeoF Central starts, when's GeoF Central, the 21st? I don't have my book out. Anyway, but yeah, the 13th. We're going to go for the 13th. So that sounds good. All right. So Houston, Katy, Texas was a lot of fun. Real nice. Lots of people there. That was great. I'm looking forward to being in Minneapolis this coming weekend, and then at GeoF Central in Newark, N-E-W-A-R-K, but if you're from Ohio, it's Newark, Ohio. So, and I learned how to pronounce Toronto, and that's it's a lazy Toronto. It's like DT, not Toronto, but Toronto. But you don't pronounce that second T so hard, Toronto. So like T-R-O-N-T-D-O, Toronto. Anyway.
Hey, John.
Yes, Lee.
I just want to say thank you for coming down to Katy. It was a pleasure meeting you, and it was a wealth of information.
Hey, it's great. I like the indoor seminars almost as much as I enjoyed fixing cars, you know, in the rolling tech, because it's inside and it's those two were well attended. I asked Tony Burgess, the XO of the, he's always the guy who's doing all the work, and he and his wife Lynn. And I said, well, shall I bring down, you know, shall I get 50 of these print? Shall I print 50 of these pages? And he said, oh yeah, that'll be plenty. Well, the one I gave away all 50, and the other one I think about how to restore your British car in an hour. That one was I think I had 3 left at the end, so those were well attended. That was a real nice show.
Well, you gave us a lot of information, and I attended all the classes you had. It was just wonderful to get a chance to see you and see you in action. Watching you in the tech sessions was like, well, I don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but it was fun to watch a master at work.
Thanks. I had a minimum of tools too, because I had to get through, I had to have enough room in my suitcase. I didn't want to take an extra suitcase with just tools,
And now you got a new compression tester.
I do. Who bought that for me?
That was Ron Redding.
Thank you. All right. That's, I've got to write that down. Thank you. Yeah, that was lots of fun working on those cars. Yeah.
Well, thank you, John.
You're welcome.
John, one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Just if you could repeat the rebuilder for the cylinder, the name of the rebuilder you mentioned.
Oh, well, we always for a brake master cylinder or something like that.
Yeah, it was for the clutch master.
Yeah.
With the short shaft.
We always used White Post, WHITE, White Post Restorations, White Post, Virginia. And when I had my daughter's MGB-GT original Lockheed clutch cylinder done, I think it was friggin' $250, and that was like 2 years ago. Just awful. But hey, I didn't want a new one that made it look like a stick-shift Toyota.
Right.
I wanted the original can on it and the whole works. So and the other.
I'm wondering if I took the original shaft out of the old one and had it had the holes welded, like made round again. If that would take care of it, I could use that shaft.
You can also weld washers on the outside, and then they use a longer clevis in there too.
That's an idea too. Okay, I might do that rather than try to have it rebuilt and use the longer shaft from the old.
If you can figure out how to make the end work, that's a Girling cylinder. That rebuild kit's an SP 1963, isn't it? I think so.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't say Girling or Lucas or anything like it. It's not a TRW.
Okay. Right.
Cylinder. So.
Right.
Like I said, I got it from Robert Kirk, and I don't know where he got it. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I've sent some things to try. I'm getting closer to getting the car running.
Good.
So, all right. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Hey, John, don't forget Import Carlisle the 10th and 11th of May for us East Coast people.
Thank you. Import Carlisle. Yeah, Jim's still got parts to sell. So we tried to work with them a little bit. Carl and I did to get them to reach out to more of the MG community, although the MG community could just take it under their wing and just do it. But it's a wonderful venue. I mean, it's got everything there. It's got a place to display your car. It's got vendors. It's got a stadium where you can buy, Chester chicken and hot dogs and hamburgers, and they've got 1,000 things to look at if you want to look at French cars. Oh my God. So yeah,
Yeah, it's a hell of a car show on Saturday.
I wish more more of the arrows of the MG clubs were turned towards that. It could be just a huge annual show for us, but not yet. Thanks, Jim. Well, it's 9:46. This is about as late as we've ever run. And Doug Clark, you're probably already gone by now, and I didn't bring a hat anyway to do our hat contest, but I'll do it next time. Doug wasn't on last time. I had my helmet, my late son's Michigan State Police riot helmet. Yeah, so.
Thanks, John.
I'm
Thanks for everything, John. We'll catch you whenever you said your next meeting is.
Thank you. Brad Schwartz, thanks for being on tonight. Greg Fisher, thank you for asking questions. Bob Moore, thanks for helping us out with stuff. And Bob and Gloria and I said Fred Horner, I met to Alan Batchelder. Nice to see you tonight. Jim Pastor, thanks very much. George, I see you're back out of the hospital, and it looks like you got your things are good in Buffalo.
They are. Everything's good, John.
Hey, great.
My garage with my MG and my slot car track.
Okay.
Is over on the side of me. It's called the slot
car. All right.
It's called the Glen. After one, and this is my little shop with all my years of trophies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun.
Very, very nice.
Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. Crystal, thanks for being on. John Uhas, thanks for being on. And thanks to everybody for being on. The names I remember. And Marty, thank you for staying ahead. Just, it seemed like one step ahead. Somebody say, well, what about Cabriolet? And you already had it up there. So I don't, yeah. So anyway, to everybody, thank you very kindly. Don't forget to push the PayPal button. Help us out.
See you in Newark.
Thanks, John.
John, thanks again. You know where to find me, I hope.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Bob.
John.
All right.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Night, John.
Thanks, John.
Night all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.
Quick question. Where is that checklist for getting a car on the MG on the road? I don't see it in the chat.
Who's that? What's that?
I
It's
just
Phil.
put it back on.
Oh, okay. It's back on then. Okay.
Right under your message. I have it as a link to my Google Drive, but it should be a PDF that you can download.
Okay.
That's the handout from Texas that John just used. Is that what you meant?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I think I see it there.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Marty, when I hit end meeting for all and I wink out, does everybody else still stay there? Can you still see
No, when you leave, it stops.
Okay.
And so I always make sure that I've saved the chat right before we finish, because
Okay.
otherwise it gets lost forever. So
okay. All right.
You have the power, John.
yeah, when you leave, we all leave.
All right. Okay.
We can arrive before you. We just can't stay after you.
All right. I didn't. Okay. I knew you
Yeah.
could. I knew because I come in and there's already Judd's already holding court and
Right.
talking to lots of people. So yeah.
Marty, what a great job.
Hey.
Thank you. Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Hit the PayPal so I can stay. You're right. John's semi-retired and I'm part-time, so we're just a half-person operation around here.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, put John on a retainer on PayPal. That's the way to do it.
Yep.
Well,
That's a
that's
good idea.
people do that. I mean, I get them. I get a notification every time somebody. Sometimes it's for $1. You know, $1 a month. Hey, that's better than no
bunch
$1
of
a
people.
month. You know, Sometimes it's a whole lot more. You know, it just depends. I support Wikipedia with $5 because I'm on Wikipedia all the time. How else is it going to work? You know, so anyway.
Well, you pay what, $11, $13 for a theater ticket these days?
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still trying to work out the membership that we're going to have, but the idea is to have a lot of these documents available and more directory and Q&As and all kinds of stuff. We're just trying to get that set up with our half-person skills here.
Hey, we can do it.
We're working on it.
All right. Good for you.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
9:51. See ya.
All right.
Night.